Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. So our panel this morning is about gender in wheat breeding. So first of all, I'd like to give a special thank you to the BGRI committee and organizers for arranging this very wonderful event. I'm sure you have been having a beautiful time. We'd also like to thank the organizer for this panel discussion today, Dr. Hali Antufan from Cornell University, and great, of course, for the travel support. And of course, thank you to our panelists for joining us this morning. So during the other day when we were having the Women Speak Up discussion, we heard a little bit about gender issues and their roles and relations and how they are a factor in one's success in one's career. So today we want to discuss a little about gender and how it is interpreted and implemented in activities revolving around wheat breeding. Back in 1975, after the International Conference of Women in Beijing, a task force to advocate for women's empowerment was formed. And this opened up the UN Decade for Women. After that, a lot of programs followed suit and were developed to come up with interventions targeting women and making resources available to women. Unfortunately, having a sole success on women wasn't very effective. And in response, between the 1980s and 1990s, gender mainstreaming was born, which took a more systematic approach to integrating gender in all development activities and programming. And yet here we are 40 years later, still having discussions focusing on women. We are still dealing with social and cultural roles and relations within societies that limit the impact of interventions. Dr. Norman Borlaug was an avid believer and advocated for taking it to the farmer. And for many of us in the room today, farmers are the direct consumers of our products and technologies. What then do we do to ensure that our products and technologies translate to impacts for the farmer? And why is it important to consider gender as wheat breeders and experts? And to help us understand this, please help me in welcoming our panelists here to discuss, does gender matter in wheat breeding? And I'll ask the panelists to each take 1 minute, please, to introduce who they are, from which institution they come from, and what they do. Panelists, welcome, please.
Thank you, Bernice, and good morning, everybody. My name is Godwin Macharia. I'm a plant breeder, specifically working on wheat in the national program in Kenya. I work with the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization at the Journal Center. And when I look around, I see at least a quarter of us have at least visited that center. I also want to mention, this is where you have the International Rust Screening Platform. And so I'm really excited today, this morning, to be in this panel to discuss or reflect at least on what is the role of gender in wheat breeding. Not because I'm a gender specialist, as it were, just because that lately I've become a champion on gender issues in wheat breeding. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gordon.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mulunesh Sakai. I'm a gender and agriculture specialist working at CIMIT Ethiopia. So for the last 3 years, I've been working with a maize project, the Nutritious Maize for Ethiopia project, and the mechanization, a small mechanization project. And currently, I'm working on a wheat project titled Gender in Wheat-Based Livelihoods, which is a BMZ-funded project. So thank you for this opportunity to speak today. Here.
Thank you, Mulunesh.
Dear colleagues and friends, it's a pleasure to be on this discussion today. My name is Alex Morgunov. I have been a wheat breeder for the last 39 years. First in Moscow as a spring wheat breeder, then since 1991 I've been working as a CIMIT in Mexico, in Turkey, in Kazakhstan, and Mexico again. And I contributed to development of several wheat varieties. And also, I always worked in a team and with a partnership in the national programs where not only technical capacity but also gender issues are extremely important.
Thank you, Alexei. Fetian?
Good morning. I am Fetian Abai from Mekelle University in the northern part of Ethiopia. I am a professor in plant breeding, mainly dealing on barley, food barley, malt barley, and also drum wheat. And currently I am Vice President for Research and Community Services in Mekelle University, where it is internationally known for partnership and also catering more than 30,000 students. My breeding interest is on breeding for drought, breeding for quality, and also dealing with aligned fields. Like, for example, currently I am leading a national leader of Feed the Future Post-Harvest Innovation Lab. I used to work also with EU funded on breeding for low inputs or organic breeding, and where ICARDA was also our partner. And I'm still working on inclusive research and decentralized breeding, where women are also in the center of my breeding objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Fetian. So let's discuss if you as breeders, I'm going to pose this question to the breeders in the panel. Do you think it's important to consider gender as you do your breeding activities? What role does gender play, and how do you think that is important in your daily activities revolving around wheat breeding? So we can start with Godwin.
Oh, thank you again, Bernice. I guess your question is so pertinent. Just in your introduction, you've taken us back to 40 years since the discussion around gender maybe started, or gender in the crop research. I want to believe that, I want to say that gender is absolutely very important, or consideration of gender issues in say, wheat breeding or in plant breeding are quite very important. This is because if you look at it in context and in situations like where you come from, developing countries, you consider that we breeders, and you have had discussions the whole of this week around making gains, packaging traits, developing varieties. So unless we really are able to deliver those varieties to the users, and we have been talking about farmers, here now we want to talk about who are those farmers. We want to deliver varieties to those women farmers that we recognize are faced by specific gender-based constraints. If you think about Kenya, for instance, most likely than not, women in general will have less access to production resources. You think about their access to land, their access to seed of those improved varieties, access to information and knowledge. Like I say, often women are disadvantaged. So me as a breeder, I feel that there should be a mechanism. If indeed we want those gains that we make, if indeed we want those varieties that we develop to transform lives, to really enhance the food security of our fellow human beings and their incomes, then we need to tease out what are those specific preferences and needs that women farmers, men farmers have in specific situations. So to cut a long story short, I would say that gender issues are really, really important in wheat breeding or plant breeding in general.
Thank you, Godwin. So you've told us that it's important to really consider gender-based constraints of both men and women to ensure that we breed for specific traits that sort of address their issues, right? Alexei, do you want to shed a little more light on this?
Yeah. Oh, friends, I feel like wheat breeding and wheat varieties, considering gender role, I think there are several, basically three areas. Um, one is if women involved in actual process of wheat production, then we have to develop variety which make it easier, like weeding, because many things in the field in rural communities, they're made by women. Then let's face it. And if we make varieties which are suppressing weeds, if they are easier to harvest, if they are easier to thresh and clean, I think that these are the areas where we can put some emphasis. Then grain harvested and processing started. Then there are two other areas. One is if actual processing and preparation of the wheat products made at home. Then we certainly need to consider quality traits which affect home-based bread preparation or bulgur preparation or whatever that product may be. And the third important issue is from consumer perspective or family consumption. Really, I feel like when I go to the shop to buy bread, I basically buy bread which my wife tells me to buy. And we know that consumption on the families is very much driven by our wives who consider health considerations and many other things. So this is also something we cannot avoid because in many ways the way we consume things are very much defined by our wives.
Thank you so much, Alexi. So definitely the woman usually is in charge of cooking. So when you're breeding, ensure that you're doing breeding focusing on traits that will make it easy to process that at home, and the quality traits in making tasty bread, right? Fetienne, do you want to add something?
Oh, yes. I mean, considering gender and introducing inclusive type of breeding is not, I don't see it only on basis of the social equity, but it is really an opportunity. It's an opportunity that we have to use because there is, I really consider the knowledge which is down in the real world is undocumented science. This has been validated through our research results. For example, I have one variety, one of the varieties released is very special in terms of its quality and in terms of its agronomic characteristics. And that variety was released in addition to the woman decision, which I have not, even my students have never been realized as trait. We have a variety that is a kind of semi-necked barley variety. We did a single crossing of purple Aliran versus blue Aliran. With a single cross, we found different type of spikes, as you know, and we had a regular 6-row, 2-row, because we crossed 2-row with 6-row. When we did selection on basis of agronomy, yield, and disease resistant as a breeder, there was a recommendation by farmers, by women farmers, that they need this specific variety. And we were very lucky that variety was part of the high-yielding variety. And we did consider for release, and it came out to have a semi-necked where the owns are withdrawn early, which really makes very easy for processing and for addressing their work drudgery. And it has also a nutrient implication where we have better nutrient content of the variety. We did a sensory evaluation with both men and women farmers, and we also did laboratory tests here in Icarda for beta-glucan, iron, and zinc, and most of the results of the farmer square were aligned with the laboratory test. And this has a very perfect match, and it was really not really expected from our side, and the surprising result, we had that kind of extra white variety, crossing brown with semi-white, We had a transgressive segregant with extra height, which has a use value importance, and also extraordinary large seed size. Beyond the Ethiopian food barley side, we managed to release an extraordinary high kernel weight and big size. That has also a very great impact for the poor farmers in dryland area. It has been disseminated in 1 year, like for 5,000 farmers, and we have really sued producer cooperatives to really multiply, and it's really demanded across the country by different regions. And this is really a very clear indication that there is a hidden knowledge already on the creators and knowledge of the woman. And in Ethiopia, we found 88% of the post-harvest loss is managed by women. And most of our pathological and entomology activities are planned and performed without really addressing their knowledge, their preference, how they do, how they handle it, and so on. So we are very, really keen to integrate and also to partner on this issue. We have an evidence. Our results are published in American Crop Science Journal. You can find that. It was a featured article, and we have many results on that regard. We really don't analyze why the genetic analysis not yet. Unfortunately, the project was phased out. That was supported by the Norwegian government. We really look forward for capturing why these ordinary traits are really expressed and they were tapped by the woman in the process of selection. Yes.
Thank you, Fatien, for that very descriptive information. Mulenesh, do you want to give your thoughts on why you think gender is very important to consider?
Yes, thank you. So the question is, does gender matter for wheat breeding? Well, I would say yes, gender matters for breeding in general, and wheat breeding in particular, because many literatures indicate that improvements in gender equality tend to enhance economic efficiency and improve development outcomes, such as family food and nutrition security and education. And yet, despite these strong evidence-based and convincing arguments, sometimes it's difficult to address gender inequality because it also requires great resourcefulness. And this is mainly because gender differences are particularly persistent when rooted in deeply entrenched gender roles in social norms. And wheat faces a special challenge in this regard in in several of its target regions, because traditionally these regions have been characterized by societies with very strong cultural and social norms, supporting this particularly persistent and unequal gender relations in roles. And again, the unequal gender relations commonly affecting intra-household dynamics in the target populations, they also tend to shape the economic and social functions of wheat as a cash crop and as a staple food in these smallholder livelihoods. So, even though improved wheat productivity may lead to overall increased household income, there is no firm basis for expecting that this will benefit women and men equally and or improve the general household welfare and nutrition. So this is where gender comes into play. Because for improved wheat technologies to have a positive impact on resource-poor smallholder communities, appropriate consideration of context-specific gender dynamics is highly important. Otherwise, technically superior, even those technically superior innovations may instead lead to further exacerbation of gender inequalities, and they may finally fail to achieve their key anticipated impacts. So in this case, I want us to see this, from a broader perspective, that gender really matters not because of women or not because of the reproductive roles that women play, not only because of that at the household level, but because gender is a development agenda at large, and addressing gender inequalities or incorporating appropriate gender considerations throughout the breeding process would help towards enhancing overall productivity, ensuring household food security and nutrition at large. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mulunesh. So you pointed out that it's important to really look at gender in what context it is that you're looking at it. So, for example, in countries like Ethiopia, in countries like Morocco, where we are, processing of wheat or how people use wheat is really from even at the home, because bread and bread-related products are very much part of the daily intakes in their meals. But in countries where wheat maybe is not processed at home, in countries where the grain is used mainly for maybe to sell directly to millers, you sort of have to look at it in both contexts. So it's really important to look at how gender constraints or the social and cultural norms play into that. So, Godwin, do you want to tell us maybe how do you think you should, as a breeder, at what stages in your breeding activities, or what steps can you take in your breeding activities to ensure that the products that you're going to be producing at the end have taken into account the gender context while you're doing your breeding activities?
Thank you again, Bernice. That's a good question. Maybe even before we go to the steps, I guess the first thing, like I alluded to earlier, is to change our attitudes as breeders or as teams, or the teams we work with, that we recognize again that the products, the technologies, the varieties we're developing should kind of be targeted to those preferences and needs that will take care of the disparity that could occur if we did otherwise. So the first thing really is to think about our toolbox as breeders. We always talk about it. We talk about the germplasm, we talk about the molecular markers, we talk about protocols. I guess it is time also we added the gender lens in our toolbox. So that as much as we are packaging our variety, then on the other hand, we are thinking about using the gender lens as a tool within our toolbox to tease out the needs and the say varietal preferences of the women and men farmers that we want to grow our varieties and to benefit from those. So again, here we're saying that attitude or change in attitude might be helpful. Beyond that, of course, since again we don't want to be a jack of all trade, it would be helpful in systems we come from to work with other disciplines. For example, in my center, we have the socio-economists that together we can work towards, trying to tease out what are these issues. And for instance, how exactly do we develop a variety? So there are many things we could do, and some of those you already have tried to start doing. When I realized, for instance, with a casual look at the requests for seed from the seed center, I went through the list or the inventory of who was it that was asking for seed or improved varieties. Just a casual look, I realized that over 95% of those would be men clients, and maybe 5% would be women. That already tells you that there's a challenge there. So what we just started doing is to decentralize our seed distribution or dissemination, so that lately we have identified stockists across the major wheat growing zones. In that case, then we think we are able to take the technology or the variety to the nearer to the woman farmer or the man farmer, as it were. We also recognize that as we disseminate, say, information around those improved varieties, more often than not, we use what we call field days or demo plots where we call farmers to come and talk to us, we talk to them. And again, you find that in most situations, it is men that turn up for those field days, which again tells you that there could be challenges that women farmers are really facing to come and visit with us. So again, we are working with a group we call the Cereal Growers Association of Kenya, really to identify how else would we do it, really. It's like working with women, self-help groups, trying to talk to those self-help groups, women self-help groups around our wheat technologies. So I guess, Bernice, again, there are a few other things that we could do and really impact better. We are saying that we're able to attract a few more women, in the case of Kenya, into wheat farming, then I guess that would really interpret maybe to better productivity or more production for the country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So you highlighted to us that it's important to have a change of attitude. It's important to have multidisciplinary teams while working, and also it is important to sort of ensure that the farmers have access to these technologies, and especially decentralizing the seed systems. Thank you. Alexi, do you want to share your views? Yes, please.
Well, colleagues, speaking of gender-sensitive or related traits, maybe we are most likely speaking not about industrial, big production on big fields, but small kind of production on the small fields in rural communities where many things also done by hand and by women. So in some traits, when we look at them, they are basically traits we already utilize for different purpose to improve wheat. Give example of fast ground cover. Wheat is not good as barley. Barley is very good in occupying the ground and leave no space for weeds. So we like to have wheat occupying this also very good to suppress the weeds. And this trait, physiologists tell us this very good trait for yield as well. So then other important trait for is and also showed in several surveys we conducted in Turkey and other countries, straw quality, and in still few areas, wheat is harvested by hand. And both men and women involved. And if we develop varieties with thick and strong straw, like European varieties, I mean, that would be the nightmare for people to harvest, because the varieties and even wheatland that they grow have very soft and very very nice straw to harvest, and also that straw is used for animals who are happy to consume that specific straw. So we try to maintain straw quality the way it is and don't make it, But here may be disadvantage because if you have more rainfall, little irrigation, they can lodge. So, and important thing also for disease resistance, because if we have small fields like we saw yesterday, small fields of wheat close to villages, really you cannot make any fungicide application, and there is no capacity, and would be harmful effect on nature and people. So we really have to consider having varieties which require no fungicide application, being resistant to rust and other prevailing diseases. So these are kind of traits for the related to agronomic performance of wheat, and then comes quality traits. Quality traits, we had a presentation yesterday mentioned about high biofortification, high iron and zinc content. I think these are very, very important traits, and that Harvest Plus project was initially targeting India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, but now I think this we see the need for this project and improvement of micronutrient content in wheat everywhere. So I think this becomes very important on agenda. Then other substances in wheat which are good for health, like dietary fiber, maybe some antioxidants, phenolic acids, etc. We are learning more and more about these traits, and I think also important that we pay attention. And we started to look at genetic diversity and how we can work to improve these traits. And then processing traits, again, speaking of in-house production of dough and bread, then really you have to have quality traits which on one hand produce very good bread, on the other hand, if you make the dough too strong, that will be very much additional labor and efforts to make that dough and bread. So I think these are the traits which we can see and consider in our program. And our program also is we have a main modern variety development kind of a program where we consider these traits and especially quality traits, but also we have very small portion of wheat land races improvement which we give back to farmers, and in that small program this gender-related traits play extremely important role. And we had a survey in the target communities, and in fact anthropologists, ladies, they went and talked to wives of the farmers who grow wheat land races, and we were very surprised and very much encouraged to learn that women's perception of the land races substantially different from men. Because what men want, they want to plant, and sometimes even they don't know very well the properties of the land races. But their wives, they really know what this land race, the grain should be like, how it should be used, etc. So really, we see that we come to the village, we talk to farmers, but really these are the wives of the farmers who make decisions which land races or which varieties to be grown. One other trait important in this environment would be also uniformity and size of the grain, because the grain harvested would be even cleaned using very primitive tools, and if it's very diverse in grain size and the uniformity, some will be lost and are not maybe utilized in the processing. But I think in this respect, this small communities where we work with subsistence kind of farming, these traits are extremely important.
Thank you very much, Alexei. And again, you pointed out quite some important points there about how women are very good at pointing out the specific sort of traits that we might be doing our trials in the demo fields, but going and planting this in the farmers' field and inviting the wives of the women farmers sheds a new light on really what many other traits are very important. So, Fetienne, I'd like you to maybe, in your earlier talk, you told us how you were able to release a variety that was has a lot of impact in Ethiopia and has been really well adapted. And coming to think of it, we have really been highlighting the role of women in pointing out the right traits. But if we want our varieties to be adopted by the whole society, then it's not just about the women. It's the farmers who will usually marshal the sort of the resources. So how are you able to ensure that, aside from looking at the women, how are you able to ensure that also the men were on board? How are you able to ensure that you are looking at both genders?
I mean, in all our breeding interventions, we involve both men and women. It's not only women.
Yeah.
So the decision made is together. But I mentioned that specific variety was picked up by a woman group for a reason they can't explain, but they told us this variety is what we need. And we realized why they need, because of the early withdrawal of the spike. Otherwise, men have also their own focus. We have realized diversity in the focus of the selection process. This is what we have realized. I found one older farmer, he said, I wouldn't grow this variety. However, my wife convinced me to grow because it's not useful in terms of its yield, but she wanted it for making local beer. So I have to grow it, and it also fits with the changing climatic condition of the area. So when we talk gender, it's also about men. They were also involved in the selection process. And we established a joint decision-making trait. And we also consider the breeders and farmers' score in the analysis together with agronomic traits, even laboratory data we have. And, actually what I am really, as a wheat breeder, wheat is a very much expanded, and I always said, it's good to be to work with wheat because it's a kind crop where it really adapts elsewhere comparing to the sensitivity of barley. And wheat is 100% used for food, and there are a lot of differences and preferences by farmers. I have the observation, local farmers were really complaining on the new varieties. They were saying, we missed our variety, which has high baking quality. We have to grow it, even if it is susceptible and less yield. They use it as a prestigious, serving for prestigious guests visiting their home or for special holidays. So here, breeders can also align with them and improving the varieties by maintaining the baking quality preferred by the farmers. Actually, this discussion reminded me Harlan report in 1924 when he visited, as part of his world expedition, when he visited Ethiopia. He was impressed on the diversity. We know that Ethiopia is contributing for the world for high lysine, for yellow dwarf virus resistance, for powdery mildew, for baking quality, and so on. And he said, there are plant breeders, in his 1924 report. And I realized, yes, there are plant breeders. When we have diversity in terms of managing the climate, quality, and biotic stresses, it is a result, I believe, it's a result of genotype by environment interaction, where the human environment is very important. So we add value by incorporating the knowledge and preference of the farmers. It's not adding knowledge, but it adds also and facilitates the adoption of new varieties for the injection into the system.
Thank you very much, Fitian, and that's a very good point that you've said, that the rural farmers are themselves some sort of breeders, because very early on, varieties or crops were domesticated by farmers who had no formal training on breeding and how to select. So really, even the farmers themselves, we can see, play a role really in helping us do our work in breeding. And Mulinash, I'd like you to tell us a little bit more and share with us, how do you think that as breeders we should go about this? What are your thoughts? Are we going in the right direction? Are we going to get to where we want to?
Okay, thank you. So, here with regard to this point, what I want to emphasize to my breeder colleagues here is that the reason for all your breeding efforts is to improve the lives of resourceful farmers and the larger community by developing technologies that farmers will easily adopt and implement. And for this to happen, your work really needs a gender lens, right from the priority setting to selection of key traits, and from multi-locational trials to the release of technologies that positively impact communities for improved food security and livelihoods. So in line with this, breeding programs for resourceful farmers need to have adequate information about their clients, both men and women clients, which will in turn again help to prioritize breeding objectives and develop the right products that match the needs of your intended target clients. So in this regard, I would like to make three specific points. One is breeding programs or breeders need to take into consideration the intersection of gender with the other socio-cultural, economic, and geographic characteristics of their intended target populations in order to target them effectively. And the second point is breeders need to know how they can obtain reliable and representative information about gender differentiated preferences that correlate with these three important characteristics. The third point relates to the different participatory breeding programs that we see taking place everywhere, involving activities such as participatory variety selection, sensory evaluation, and so on. So with regard to participation, it's very useful to identify the three dimensions of participation that define the quality of participation that men and women farmers would have. The first one is the stage of participation, the stage in the breeding cycle where we invite men and women farmers or other users to participate. The second one refers to the degree of participation, and the third one refers to the role that these participants or the actors play, in the breeding process. So referring to the stage of participation, it is really fair to say that the earlier user participation occurs, the better opportunity users are given to influence the objective, breeding strategy, and final outcomes. And the second point refers to the degree to which farmers, men and women farmers, and other users who participate actually influence or make decisions about the breeding process at any given stage, which is very important again. And the third one refers to the role. In this case, both researchers and farmers can participate. They do participate regardless of the stage and degree, but they may take, again, different roles or functions in the breeding process. So in this case, emphasizing on the quality of participation, especially from farmers' side, is very important, because from my experience, especially with the maize breeding programs where I've been working with for the last 3 years, I see breeders invite farmers for participation, usually with regard to the stage, almost at the last stage of the breeding process or the breeding cycle where the varieties come to release. So in that case, farmers may come to farmers' field days. They got invited. They see the new released technologies at their green or close to their harvest stage. So they give their own inputs as they see at that final level of the breeding cycle. So in this case, the inputs that they give may not even be seriously taken, or may not have that much influence in making decisions in selection of which variety to add or which variety not to. So in general, I would like to emphasize gender-responsive breeding really requires an interdisciplinary collaboration. It's not all about breeders or gender experts working side by side, but there is a need for biological researchers and social researchers, including gender experts, to come together and work as a team in order to be able to really address the needs of our intended final users.
Thank you very much, Mulenesh. And I think from the discussions, it's very clear that it's very important for us to work as multidisciplinary teams. And I think from our talk yesterday, it was very important, and we really saw the importance of collaboration. And together we can really make an impact. And so I'm just going to throw this last question to everyone in the panel, and you're all welcome to sort of respond to this. So gender is about social relations and power. And on the other hand, breeding is about genetic improvement of crops and plants. So day by day, can breeders actually have a direct sort of impact on gender issues? So let's hear your reactions.
Again, I guess we don't want to belabor the point that yes, indeed, breeders and can have a role in gender issues. But taking it up from where Mulanesh has left, it appears then for breeders to succeed in that, they have to dedicate some resources, including time and any other resources in their downstream activities in terms of planning of their breeding activities, implementing the breeding itself, raising the varieties, disseminating the seeds. It seems that you have to put aside some time and resources that would go towards incorporating gender considerations in the whole scheme, as much as we dedicate other resources to, say, to other things like markers, for instance. So breeders, again, have a chance to work with other disciplines and ensure that gender-responsive varieties are developed, disseminated, used, and indeed that those varieties impact on the livelihoods of the intended clients who are our fellow human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Godwin. Any more comments or reactions?
Yes, we say that gender is about social relations, and of course, breeders are also part of this society. So in this case, they can have a direct impact in addressing gender issues, both negatively and positively. So saying this, we all know that men and women farmers play different roles in production, processing, and sales of different crops. And in line with this, they both tend to give priority to traits that are important to them as food providers, as processors, or marketers or sellers of products. So in this case, breeders, in order to meet their users' needs, they need to understand, as I mentioned earlier, the priorities that women and men assign to the different genetically determined traits, such as could be the taste, color, texture, or shape of the crops. Because as we all know, in many countries, women are the guardians of household food security and nutrition. So in this case, if, for instance, breeders overlook the traits which are very important to women users, this can aggravate household food insecurity and poverty. So in line with this, the best way to ensure gender responsiveness in breeding programs is one, as I mentioned earlier, by enhancing interdisciplinary collaboration. And the second way is for breeders, breeders do not need necessarily to be gender experts. But of course, in order to move forward their good intentions of serving, their final users, they need to have enough practical methods and tools to help them decide on how to be, more gender responsive in their breeding efforts and consider gender differences in their breeding schemes. So, with regard to this, I would like to refer to the work that the CGI, our Gender in Breeding initiative, is currently doing by bringing both plant and animal breeders and social scientists to develop a strategy for a more gender responsive breeding, where there have already been developed some tools, including a flow chart showing the different stages in the breeding cycle and the critical decision points where we need to take gender at each and every stage of the critical decision points, and again other related working tools which are more practical and easily usable, including checklists, more practical and user-friendly checklists that anyone who's not a gender expert can practically use in their activities. So in this regard, I want to make some 3 points to summarize. One is that for breeders, there is a need to know when, where, and why women are important beneficiary groups, and take into account the important differences in constraints faced by women and men farmers that breeding can influence. That's one of the points. The second one is there is a need to anticipate again on how design decisions in the breeding process may impact or be influenced by women's labor, available resources and opportunities out in the environment where they function. The third point is there is a need to design breeding objectives whenever necessary, to particularly benefit women farmers when they are found to be important beneficiary groups who require a special approach and consider their needs, constraints, and knowledge more generally in the breeding program. The other point is the issue of accountability. As we may all know, gender mainstreaming or appropriate consideration of gender into any program really requires the political will and again, accountability. So in this regard, there is a need to make sure the success of breeding programs is measured in ways that indicate positive impacts for women as well as for households and farmers in general. So in this case, to me that whenever it is important and necessary, we may need to have, women as a special group that we want to target. In other cases, we may have a kind of gender integrated approach whereby we address the needs of men and women by first, identifying and then appreciating the gender differences in needs, interests, and experience of women and men farmers. So these are the points that I would really like to make in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mulanesh. Some very important take-home points. I think we have some little time left for questions, and at this point, I'd like to invite any questions or comments from the audience. Yes, please.
Thanks very much for this positive discussion, but I have one question from the panel that apparently you did very positive discussion and it was looking that, okay, to encourage the females, like we need to change the attitude, this and that. But I believe like this is only one picture of the side. The other picture, you can say the real picture is really, really very different that we are being expressed on this focus. If you just jump into the practical situation and see the situation in the developing countries, the things are not charming as you are going to discuss on this forum. Like my question from panel is that all this is just a verbal discussion. Like it's like it seems very attractive and it's fancy, but when you go in the field but when you go in the research stations, the part of the woman is really criticizing. So what you can do in real, not in verbal, not in argumentation, not in discussion, what steps you can take to really motivate and really distinguish the woman, the part of the gender in the breeding, and not only in the breeding of wheat, in agriculture. Like I have noticed means in rural areas, in very remote rural areas, even the female workers are getting very less salary. I myself noticed in the cotton picking areas, I saw many women who are picking cotton with the kids, but they are less paid labor. So it is very easy to sketch a picture, a good picture when you are on international forum, but when it is in the practical line, it's very hard to implement your argumentation. So I am strong believer of these things. You must take a very strong and practical step that is not only for the discussion, that is meant to be implemented. One of our panel speakers said that we need to change the attitude. So I want to ask, do you have done anything practically to change the attitude at your institute level, at your national level, or your international level? At international level, I noticed like all of you seems to be encouraging, but the real story is not like this. I don't agree that women are encouraged so much as we get an intention from here. In third world countries, in developing countries, the situation is totally different. So I just want to have a practical solution, what you are going to do on personal level, individual level, or even on international level. What are the practical steps that can really solve out this solution?
Thank you. Reactions, panel? That's a very tricky.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
So
Kathy,
if I
thank
could make
you.
a reaction, I think it's really important to hear what you're saying, but I also think that we have to work with the community where we're at and gradually get better. So the approach is, to look at what's working well and try to amplify it. So we all need to be part of the solution, right? And I think this is a community that's come a long way in the last 10 years. That, okay, we didn't start with a full room, but we've got like most people at the conference here now to listen to this discussion. And I think it's on all of us to change the culture. It's on this community, people that have the power as wheat breeders, as funders, as decision makers in really important positions of authority to actually make a change ourselves and to listen to voices like yours. And we can't expect that we're going to go from not paying any attention to gender to being perfect about it overnight. But it's a process. And I think if we look back, we've come a long way. Do we still have a long way to go? Yes, we still have a long way to go. So it's important to keep talking about it and to look for approaches. And I really salute the panel for coming up and for having this discussion. And Maricelis was just mentioning that Godwin and Bernice were part of a program at Makerere University called Grains, that's a really practical approach to get breeding groups to come together, to work together on their approaches and to incorporate gender into their own breeding programs. And so from my perspective, I think it's really encouraging to see the progress. I think, yes, we've still got a long way to go, and this is a step in the right direction, and let's keep moving in that way. And then Maricelis, I think, wants to...
Thank you very much, Kathy.
I just wanted to mention too that I encourage all of you to look at the gender responsive project that we have at Cornell. Great. This year they hosted a training in Uganda where Godwin and Bernice were part of it. Also a team from our DGGW in Ethiopia and two from Kenya participated on this because we really take it serious. We just don't do the talk. We really want to incorporate gender responsiveness in all of our projects. We do it at Cornell, and we want to bring it to the international community, working with CIMIT and with the international centers. We really believe in it, and we wanted to do it from a scientific point of view. That takes it from the breeding, also the participatory training at the institutions for gender equity, because it has to be at every step. It has to be at the institution, it has to be at the farmers' fields, it has to be in the markets. We need to take it into consideration if we want our community to change. So I really thank you for bringing the idea that we have to take it from the forum and into the fields and into the laboratories, and we are really doing that, and we want to continue working. And that's what we're working on. And so we really thank you because that's exactly how we feel that we need to take it at every stage. I think we're running out of time to stay on track with the session, but please use this opportunity to continue the conversation. Take this conversation into the breaks, the lunch, and when we go home, communicate back to us. Get more. We want to hear your ideas and how we can do it better and how we can continue improving, and we can also give you additional resources so we can continue taking this conversation into our laboratories. So thank you so much for being here, and we're going to start with the next session. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you very much.